Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be getting into episodes 607 through 609, which will cover manga chapters 681 through 683, and all hell starts to break loose as everyone is split up trying to accomplish all their separate objectives, but Caesar and his crew are proving to be very formidable in stopping them. Alright, so synopsis. Luffy is now ready for round 2 with Caesar with the knowledge that he needs to be careful of his oxygen-stealing ways, while Vergo rushes to stop Law's latest plans to disrupt the manufacturing of the mysterious substance known as SAD. All the while, the Straw Hats and the Marines are working to survive the poison and the dragon while looking to save the children. Okay, so differences. There are quite a few differences in these episodes, but let's get started with the first one. So in the manga, Luffy and Caesar's fight goes uninterrupted till Monet intervenes, and then we catch up with Sanji and Vergo. However, in the anime, in episode 607, the fight gets interrupted when Caesar uses the Gastanet on him, and then it cuts to Sanji versus Vergo, where we get a few more action shots of Sanji versus Vergo trading kicks and blocks, whereas the manga, when it cuts back to Sanji, it immediately shows Vergo eating the flambage strike from Sanji already in progress. There's also this added filler scene in the anime of the Brownbeard group getting attacked by the dragon, where they argue that Brook, who is the eldest, should be the one to take care of the dragon. In the manga, this isn't present, and we don't get to see them actually take on the dragon until after we see the scene with Doflamingo and his family. Similarly, there's an added scene in the anime where we see Law walk up to the room where the SAD is located, and he takes out a couple henchmen, which isn't present in the manga either. Caesar chasing Luffy down with the blue sword and then subsequently getting kneed by Luffy is elongated in the anime. In the manga, he takes a couple swipes rather than like 20 of them. He just kind of, in the anime, he's just literally swiping at him over and over. And there's like this good 20-minute or 20-second segment of him just swinging the sword repeatedly. And he never gets kneed like he does in the anime. Instead, Luffy just goes right into Jet Gatling and strikes him. Another difference is just after the call with Doflamingo, Luffy and Monet have a small skirmish that's not included in the manga. In the manga, after the call, the next thing we actually see is the Brownbeard team still dealing with the dragon, and this is where we get into the canon part of the dragon fight. Similarly, the scene we see of Chopper and the kids where Chopper asks Mocha to take the candy away is also added anime filler, although there is a scene very similar to this that's shown as a flashback later on, when Chopper explains, to the other Straw Hat members how they got into this dangerous situation and just the danger that Mocha is in at the moment. And lastly, in the moment where Luffy almost gets frozen by Monet, in the anime, Luffy snaps out of it just in time by remembering Zoro scolding him earlier. But in the manga, he just wakes up without any sort of other motivations other than survival. I'm going to go ahead and get into this a little bit more in the actual meat of the podcast, because there is something I do want to mention about this, because it is very different actually in both interpretations. But that'll do it for the differences, so let's get into the episodes themselves. And this has to be said that it's at this point the anime really begins to go out of its way to slow the pacing down quite a bit. Like if you notice, episode 607, if you look, the actual new content doesn't start till like around the 7-minute 25-second mark. And in a 24-minute episode, that's almost all of the episode's runtime just gone. When you include the commercial eye catcher and the next episode preview, you're looking at around like 35% of the episode just being non-news story content. And you're actually only getting about like maybe 15, 16 minutes of actual new content, which is pretty crazy. Now, granted, the other two episodes that we go over in this set aren't as bad, but they're still around like the 5 or 6 minutes of just non-useful content. And this is something that will further and further get worse as the series goes on. Like in the next arc, it gets pretty unbearable. But I've mentioned this several times, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse. But yeah, this is the point where you really start to notice it, and it starts to kind of get on your nerves. Or at least it did for me. Anyways, with that mini rant over, let's get into the episodes themselves, actually. Picking up right where we begin, like I mentioned, we do get a bit more of a better look at the initial punch from Luffy on Caesar, but it's still not great. And this is something that I talked about in the last podcast episode. But in fact, the way much of this fight is choreographed and translated from manga, there's a lot to be desired. The manga has many of these action beats in wide shots to show more dynamically what is happening, as well as being economically as possible when it's using its short page count. And while yes, you can show more motion with animation, the way the anime uses this tool somehow makes it worse, at least in this moment. And in my opinion, like, you may feel differently, but for example, towards the beginning of the fight, the moment where initially Luffy unexpectedly lunges at Caesar to try and grab him, and Caesar jumps up in shock, and it's a close-up shot for some reason, and he just flies up out of camera rather than showing him in a wider shot where he does the same thing, but we can actually see where he ends up going. And it looks more cinematic the way it's framed in the manga. And it actually shows where they both are in that space, and the shot isn't as cluttered. And this happens a couple times throughout this fight. However, I do love the use of the colors in this scene. Once Caesar, he sets the room on fire, it does create a lot of like cool coloring and different like lighting effects. And that they get right in this scene. But I don't know what it is, but the way this particular fight is storyboarded was not great. And yeah, I don't know why it's so spotty like this. I know there are different directors for different episodes to try and keep up with the pacing, but yeah, this one was particularly bad. Anyways, Caesar then attempts to use the same oxygen depletion technique on Luffy, but this time he's prepared for it. And again shows that Luffy is thinking, and he's very strategic when it comes to combat and fighting, and he backs off systematically looking for the range of it and memorizes it so that he knows what the limits of that move is. And that's one thing I love about Luffy, is that no matter how many times he loses, he's always thinking of new strategies and weaknesses to deal with any and all abilities to overcome those, no matter how crazy or impossible it may seem. As a translator's note, though, we get the name of the oxygen depletion move, and it's called the Karakuni, which literally translates as empty land. But interestingly enough, when you look at the kanji that Oda chose to use for the move, the kanji he chose to use can literally be read as airless world. And the thing about kanji, if you're not aware, is that the same kanji character, depending on the context they're used in, can be used to generate different words and different sounds. So you can sometimes mix and match kanji to create the same word that sounds phonetically the same, but can mean something different. And this is a bit hard to demonstrate with just audio on a podcast, but Oda often uses this technique as another tool in his arsenal of wordplay gags and jokes for names for a variety of different things. I also think the karakuni can also be a play on the word karakuri, which is like mostly used for mechanism, but it can also be used as a trick. And so, yeah, that might be kind of also just kind of a wordplay between karakuri and karakuni. So that could also be it. I don't know if that's actually true. That's just my own sort of theory. The other thing we can learn from this is that Caesar seems to like the naming convention of something land, as he names his latest, poison gas weapon as the Shinokuni, or Land of Death. And now he's got this other move called the Karakuni, or the Airless World, or the Land of Empty. And so, yeah, he seems to like this naming convention quite a bit. Another thing to note about this moment for me was that this shows the range on the Karakuni is actually far wider than I thought. Earlier when he uses it, it seems like he had to be almost right up against the person, but it's actually further and more closer to like 25 feet, which I was surprised at the range of that move, which I guess isn't that surprising, but just given the way he was using it, it almost seemed like he had to be on top of them to be able to actually suffocate them. Now that Luffy knows the most devastating thing he has to worry about, he can fight a bit more freely, but it's still a difficult fight against Caesar, as there's a lot you can do with gas and fire. I do love that Luffy yet again finds a way, as he kind of goes back to using a technique that was used to save him during the Arlong Park fight when he was stuck underwater. His head was stretched out of the water to allow him to breathe, and he employs a very similar tactic here as he flings his head out of the range of the Karakuni so he could still breathe, but moves his body in closer for the attack. And this scene was actually animated really well, and it looks great. Not to mention the badass line from Luffy where he activates Gear Second and says determinedly that if he can't breathe, then he'll have to take him out with one breath. Like, that is so cool. The aspect that's so awesome about this scene is the fact that Caesar tries to let Luffy go, making it seem like he's got better things to do, but you can tell that he's getting a little scared of Luffy, and he only manages to get away thanks to Monet's help. This is where we get the reveal of what Monet can actually do, and it appears that she is not only a harpy thanks to Law, but she possesses a devil fruit, but not just any devil fruit, it's a snow Logia devil fruit, the Yuki Yuki no Mi, or Yuki meaning snow, so snow fruit in English. And this is interesting because on the surface, while all Logias are definitely strong, this one seems a little inferior in every way to Kuzan's Hie fruit or his Ice fruit. Kind of similar to how Ace's Mera fruit was just a weaker version of Sakazuki's Magu fruit. And I'll get more into this fruit as we see her use it later on. And fun fact, Monet is canonically the first and only female Logia Devil Fruit user as of the time of recording this episode into chapter 1136 of the manga. And also, as another translator's note, the move that she uses to protect Caesar, the Kamakura, in Japanese literally means snow hut, or as we in English like to call it, an igloo. She then eventually traps Luffy in an even bigger one called the Kamakura Juso, or the 10-layer igloo. And speaking of the scene with the 10-layer igloo, this is very interesting for how it's differently portrayed in the anime versus the manga. Like I mentioned in the differences section, the anime has Luffy break free due to his sudden recollection of Zoro scolding him from earlier. But in the manga, he just freaks out and wakes up realizing he's about to die. Now, whether it was Oda's original intention to have Luffy's sudden burst of motivation due to Zoro, that's not necessarily clearly coming across the manga because he just didn't have time to do that, or it just an animalistic survival instinct that Luffy possesses, it's hard to determine which it was. The manga panel of Luffy's face is even differently portrayed, almost to the point where it feels like a retcon of the entire scene. Like, Luffy's face in the manga is one of like, as I would describe it, like comedic panic, as he suddenly yells out, "Gomu Gomu no!" Whereas in the anime, it's far more intense and determined looking, and even looks like he activated his Conqueror's Haki with that sort of burst of energy that seems to emanate out of him, which the manga gives no hint of at all. And this is a very interesting choice on the part of the screenplay adapter, writers, and directors of the anime. I don't think it's necessarily a bad decision. In fact, I actually kind of like the anime version better, to be honest, but this leads Luffy to blast the floor underneath him with a jet spear, which unfortunately sends him plummeting down into a trash chute, knocking him out of the fight for a bit, which is another common trope of sidelining Luffy for a bit so he can dramatically return at the end, which is a necessary mechanic that happens in almost every anime and almost every arc in One Piece. One last thing I want to discuss about Monet for now is that now that we have Monet's Devil Fruit revealed, we can just briefly touch upon a common theme that Oda has been using in this arc. And if you haven't caught on by now, I'll go ahead and explain it here. If you notice that throughout Punk Hazard, Oda has been dropping a bunch of sort of mythical creatures all over the place, or references to them. And Monet actually counts as two. So to start, we've seen a real Western medieval dragon, a bunch of centaurs. We've also seen the Cool Brother Yetis. And then Monet is a harpy, but until now, we've only seen her as a harpy. But with the reveal of the Yuki Yuki fruit user, she has another reference. She is a Yuki Onna, or snow woman, due to how Logia users are often called something otoko or something onna. Basically, the element plus man or element plus woman. So like Smoker was referred to as a Kemuri otoko or smoke man. And even to this day, Luffy calls Smoker Kemurin for short. However, the significance of the Yuki Onna or the snow woman in Japanese is because the Yuki Onna in Japanese folklore is a yokai or spirit that basically poses as a beautiful woman in sort of a blizzard or a mountainous region, that in some versions of the story lures lone travelers to their deaths by making them stray from their paths, get lost, and die of exposure, which is essentially what Monet pretty much tries to do with Luffy, as she tries to lull him to sleep through the intense cold. It's generally meant to serve as a cautionary tale to be careful when venturing out into cold mountains or freezing temperatures. However, There are versions of this story where the Yukionna is presented as a benevolent spirit as well. It kind of just depends on what version you read, and there are a lot of different versions from a lot of different sources. But the sort of the cautionary tale version is probably the most prevalent one, I feel like. At least that's the one that I'm most familiar with in like other media. The end of episode 607 sees Law break into a building with something called the SAD manufacturing facility. Now, to us, this has no real meaning just yet, but everyone in the know began to piece together what Law's true intentions are. And based on Monet, Vergo, and Caesar's reaction to this realization, it does give you the sense of the gravity of what Law is doing, even though we don't know what he's actually doing. And it is pretty chills inducing seeing how freaked out all of these people are becoming at what Law is attempting. However, since this is an anime, you often think that these characters are probably just being over dramatic to increase the stakes of the writing in the moment, but by the time the whole context of what Law is doing becomes clear, much later on in the story, after this whole saga ends, it certainly was not hyperbolic to say that this did flip the world on its head, as these characters are describing, so rewatching this moment really does give you even more chills, because you now get to see this moment with the full understanding of what was going through these characters' minds. And that makes for a really fun rewatch moment to see, like, oh, I get it. This was a really big deal. And it wasn't like some overreaction, particularly Vergo's reaction to what was happening. Like, this was a big deal. Rewinding a little bit back to Sanji versus Vergo, despite Sanji's immense strength, Vergo is no slouch as he just shakes off being buried in a wall by one of Sanji's kicks like it was nothing. In the fight, one notable thing happens after guarding one of Vergo's attacks. As Sanji guards it, it actually fractures Sanji's tibia bone, which is quite the shock as it shows just how tough Vergo is, no doubt due to his proficient use of armament haki. It makes it clear that Sanji at this point can't use armament haki, only observation haki. And this is even confirmed by Oda in an SBS that at this point in the story, Luffy could use all three forms of haki, Zoro can use armament haki, and Sanji can only use observation haki, which I personally found it surprising that Sanji couldn't use it. Although a broken bone never really stopped Sanji before, he even says as much in the fight with Mr. Two Bonkre, that he broke several ribs in that fight and nothing really happened to him afterwards. In fact, he was still able to help out even afterwards. But it is curious how Oda keeps talking about Sanji's durability throughout this arc, particularly when Nami was stuck in his body, only to then use it to show just how tough Vergo is by having him fracture one of his bones. Later we see that even Sanji realized just how dangerous Vergo was, as he's seen wincing a bit in pain after rescuing some of the G5 soldiers from the gas, admitting that if that fight had gone on, he might have been in some danger. And that is something we hadn't really seen, but it seems like someone else is going to have to take down Vergo, and judging by how the story has been set up, that person is probably either going to be Law or Smoker, and it makes sense that it would be him or them, and why Oda chose to make Vergo stronger than Sanji. As Vergo makes his way to Law, he makes contact with none other than Doflamingo himself, and at the time this was really crazy as it signified that there was a real possibility that Doflamingo, the Shichibukai that seemed to pose the biggest threat and the most mysterious one, would be coming to the forefront in the coming arcs, and that eventually he and Luffy would clash. And I know everyone at the time was pretty hyped to see this because for a decade now, we've gotten hints of how strong and dangerous Doflamingo is, especially the little bit we got to see at the Summit War. And I, for one, was hyped out of my mind that we finally get to see Doflamingo become a main villain. It almost felt like a lot like how Crocodile felt when he was introduced, like this looming threat that seemed larger than life with an immense amount of buildup. And spoiler alert, Oda doesn't disappoint with Doflamingo. But before any of that, let's explore this brief snippet at the taste we were about to get and what would become the next arc that follows, Punk Hazard, as we see Doflamingo's home island of operation in Dressrosa, which on the surface appears to be some sort of a sunny tropical island. Additionally, we will also get to see several of his crew members or his Don Quixote family members, and we only get about half of them teased here, with the most prominent and the only one that's actually named being Baby 5, the woman that's attacking Doflamingo in an incredibly chaotic with a lot to dive into. First off, it's quite clear that while his crew or family is very close knit, as many of them call Doflamingo Waka, which the subtitles translate as youngin, but Waka is actually short for Wakadanna or young master, kind of what rich fancy people refer to like a young man or a boy. It's kind of similar to how Alfred refers to Bruce as Master Bruce in Batman. Additionally, Vergo seems to be close enough to Doflamingo that he can call him by a different nickname in Dofi. And there's a lot going on. Baby 5 attacking Doflamingo in a fit of rage for some reason. We don't really know. But it seems like there is a lot of animosity and volatility in this so-called crew/family, as we see another one with a pretty cool design just straight up shoot Baby 5 in the shoulder to calm her down. And this isn't even to mention that Baby 5 has a pretty insane devil fruit that allows her to seemingly change her body parts into various weaponry. And I guessed the name of this fruit as soon as I saw it here as the Buki Buki no Mi, or the weapon fruit. And I think the official English name for this fruit is actually called the arm fruit. There's obviously more going on here because Doflamingo doesn't seem offended or fazed by this, really. And he even sends her on a mission to Punk Hazard, along with another member called Buffalo, who's not present in this scene. I think one of the cooler moments of this scene is easily the part where even Doflamingo gives Luffy his props and warns the trio of Caesar, Monet, and Vergo not to underestimate Luffy due to his conqueror's haki, and that he's potentially even more dangerous than Law, which sent chills down my back. Like, we are now at a point where Luffy is now big enough that even the Shichibukai members no longer underestimate Luffy and view him as a legit threat. Like, that is coming a long ways, because up till now, every Shichibukai has basically underestimated Luffy as just some no-name rookie, but now one of the more dangerous pirates in the world views Luffy as a potential threat to him, which is pretty cool. However, as awesome as this scene with Doflamingo and the tease of his crew is, it kind of highlights another issue with this arc, and that is its villains, specifically Caesar, because of this revelation and actually seeing him in the flesh, it creates this sort of diminishing impact of Caesar. Even now, while Caesar started off as a pretty horrifying and disgustingly cruel villain, he's kind of become this sort of like scared joke of a villain. Like, Luffy can easily beat this guy if things would stop getting in his way. Like, there's no real threat anymore, especially after their last interaction where he just runs off like a scaredy cat. More so than that, our collective excitement for Doflamingo has now shifted our attention away from Punk Hazard and Caesar to Doflamingo in the next arc, even though we're supposed to still be in the thick of the most action-packed part of this arc. And that's a problem. It's fine to tease future villains in the next arc, but it can't steal the show, and that's precisely what this scene does. Like, it's not just this scene, but it's just the way Caesar as a character and as a main villain is handled in general. I've already mentioned how much I just don't like Caesar as a character, not just from a personality standpoint, but just like how he's written. This character is constantly kind of at odds with himself. He's introduced as this threatening, vile, sadistic, and cruel, and even disturbing character with all the crap he's done thus far. Like, I don't think it's lost on anyone just how effed up some of the things that he's done. And we haven't even seen what I consider the most disturbing thing that happens in this arc. But at the same time, Caesar is also presented as this kind of comedic joke character as well, which I've gone on and on about how Oda does a good job of balancing like the serious and comedic tones without creating sort of like this whiplash effect. But I feel like with Caesar, he's kind of got the balance wrong here. While I think it's certainly fine to make a villain have comedic traits, but if you want us to take them seriously as a villain, he's still actually gotta be scary and pose a real threat. But because of what Oda's done with Caesar thus far, Oda managed to accomplish that early on, but then he diluted it with one defeat and a joke after the other. And this is another huge reason why people in general don't like the arc. It's the main villain. Caesar is just annoying and or not a very threatening villain that is outclassed by even his own underlings in Monet and Vergo, much less Doflamingo being added to that equation. Like, Vergo is a far more threatening villain with a similar profile of a man who lies and manipulates while possessing an incredibly sadistic and cruel nature. but he also has that comedic and silly side of him being a very forgetful person as well as a messy eater with that sort of whole gag of things sticking to his face. But none of those things undermine his competency as a villain, and it's offset by him actually being a very real threat that even Sanji and Law have already been shown to have a very difficult time fighting. But that being said, as much as I hate Caesar, for me it is a low, a low aspect in the arc, but there's still not enough to make it so that I hate this arc. In fact, there's still a lot that I enjoy, and so yeah, I can overlook how bad of a villain Caesar is and still enjoy Punk Hazard, despite my issues with it. But I think for me, it would have been better had they not actually shown Doflamingo. Like, they can tease him, and I think the way that Oda handles him early on, where Law basically reveals that Joker is Doflamingo, I think if they had stopped it at that point, it would have been perfect, where he's this looming threat that you just are alluding to. But with his actual appearance in this arc, it really makes him a very real presence, in the sense that, like, now Doflamingo is basically the main villain of this arc almost. Like, he is the person above Caesar, and Caesar is now just an underling, essentially. And so, yeah, it just kind of takes away the impact of Caesar, and on top of the fact that he's already an annoying ass character and you just hate him, not just because you like love to hate him, you actually just hate him. He's just annoying. Moving back to the Brownbeard crew, they're still being threatened by the dragon, but they all combine their talents together, minus Zoro, who's just kind of laying around taking it doing nothing. But they all combine together to take out the dragon, with Nami even doing her best ninja impression, with Brook and Kinemon getting this really cool dual fire and ice combo attack. However, there's this scene after that is a little understated in the manga, but is given proper weight in the anime, which I thought was a nice touch. And that moment is where Kinemon starts to furiously kick the downed dragon to the point of like kind of crazed rage. That seems a bit overboard for what the dragon was doing to them. You get the sense that there's more to this incredibly strong overreaction to dragons, like he has like history with dragons. And definitely you'll want to file this moment away for much later, because it does come up and become a little relevant. Unfortunately, with Luffy out of the picture, Monet has now turned her attention to the kids, who are currently after Mocha in a frenzied state of withdrawals to get their next fix with the candy, but she and Chopper have been fighting to keep it out of the hands of everybody. And this has now turned a bad situation into an even worse one. But luckily, Zoro is there, who can use armament haki and stand up against Monet. Law, meanwhile, is getting his ass handed to him by Vergo due to his immense strength, but also for the fact that he's got Law's heart and can damage it at any time, which makes it sound like a romantic thing, but I assure you there is no love between these two. It looks like it might be the end for Law, but Smoker finally catches up to Vergo, and this is when I got really pumped that we are finally going to get to see Smoker do something cool in the story with his revenge on Vergo for betraying them and the Marines as a whole. And I was hyped out of my mind for Smoker to actually do something, because you all know that I do like Smoker as a character, but he just doesn't get as much, and we'll definitely talk about this in the next podcast episode. But the last little bit I wanted to mention is the reveal that Momonosuke, Kinemon's son, is somewhere in the facility, but he's been wrapped up in some sort of an incident where he entered a secret room and apparently obtained the ability to transform into a dragon, which is a huge revelation. Like, Momonosuke must have accidentally eaten a dragon zone devil fruit, which in all likelihood is a mythical zone, which is insane to think that this is out there, and a little kid ate it. And we'll talk more about this on the next podcast as we get more stories surrounding Momonosuke. One thing that was always interesting is how Oda positions Kinemon to be someone who seems to have an extreme hatred of dragons, but now his son has inadvertently become one. So it'll be interesting to see his reaction to this new aspect of his son as well. But yeah, we'll get into all of that in the next episode. But for now, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. That really helps, and it also gets me really excited. And also, if you're feeling extra generous, feel free to support my podcast in any way possible. But of course, that's not required. I definitely love it when you just listen and download. Check out my Instagram and X account at Sunny Go Podcast for updates on when I post new episodes or to see some pictures of my manga collection and my One Piece card game collection. As always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast. There will be a spoiler section after this because this set of episodes do have a lot of setups for many things in the future to come. So there is a decent amount to actually talk about here in the spoiler section. But if you're not interested in that, stay safe out there and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot to that's referenced in these episodes, particularly with Doflamingo. You know, we get our first look at Dressrosa and the Don Quixote family. With Baby Five, we also get to see Gradius, Sugar, Mark Weiss, Laoji, and Jola all in this scene. Although the Laoji and Jola are pretty obscured with the silhouettes, but yeah, obviously missing are the big hitters like Diamante, Pika, and Treble. And it's kind of surprising that Treble wasn't in this scene, just given how like he sticks to Doflamingo almost all the time, and he's also supposed to be Sugar's bodyguard. So, I mean, obviously this may be at a point where maybe Oda didn't think of Treble yet, but yeah, it's very interesting that he's missing from this sort of group shot. But it was really cool to see them. And I kind of actually forgot that they were introduced here this early on. There's also a decent amount of references to Wano. Obviously, the sort of the smaller one is Nami doing her ninja impression when attacking the dragon, which is basically going to come true as Nami will dress and kind of work with Shinobu as a kunoichi ninja. And so, yeah, that's kind of a cool sort of foreshadow, I guess you can say. It's not really foreshadow, but more of like a coincidental reference. The other one, though, is clearly a foreshadow with Kinemon's hatred of dragons. Like that intense reaction of him just repeatedly kicking the dragon hints at his hatred towards Kaido, obviously. We would later go on to see Kaido as a dragon devil fruit user. He essentially destroys his home, kills his mentor, and forces him out of his home into this big adventure. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely no love for dragons, with Kaido and everything. But one thing that's very strange is how, again, like I mentioned in this non-spoiler section, how Oda seems to set up this sort of weird, I guess, twist, but nothing really comes of it. If my memory serves me, it's been a little while since I've reread or rewatched Punk Hazard, so my memory is a little hazy on this, but I don't remember this ever coming up. But the fact that nothing ever comes of Momonosuke becoming a dragon and sort of Kinemon having this strong reaction or anything, because I think what we're meant to believe is that Kinemon might like be angry or like have a very negative reaction to Momonosuke becoming a dragon because of his intense hatred of dragons shown earlier here, but I don't think anything ever comes of it. And then lastly, we get to see some of the SAD chemicals, and it's definitely very similar looking to the green blood found in the pacifistas or the seraphims that allows them to use the devil fruits. And so seeing the SAD chemicals and then now also knowing about the green blood in the seraphims, it seems to be that whatever allows them to extract like the essence of devil fruits seems to be this green sort of liquid. And that may have something to do with where the devil fruit powers come from and how they can sort of extract it and inject it into different things. And this may also be how Vegapunk injects the devil fruit abilities into inanimate objects, is he extracts like this sort of whatever this green substance is and then uses that in inanimate objects, and then obviously he will then go on to iterate on that and allow pacifistas to inherit devil fruit abilities. And so yeah, I thought that was interesting. That's something I never noticed until this rewatch, was the fact that the SAD chemicals look very similar to the green blood in the Seraphim pacifistas. Anyways, that's all I really wanted to talk about. Nothing too deep or anything like that, just more so observations than anything. But if you stuck around, thanks for listening, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye.